Hello and welcome to the season 2 premiere of VHS Era. Now, there was one man who kept somehow appearing on episode after episode of VHS Era. That was Mr. Eddie Murphy himself. And because of that, I have decided to open up VHS Era by doing an Eddie Murphy month. So, for the month of September, I will be doing two, maybe three Eddie Murphy movies. And I thought to begin Eddie Murphy month, I would have someone on the show who actually worked with Eddie Murphy for a couple years. So, everyone, this is my best Don Pardo impression I can muster. Please give a warm welcome to Gary Kroeger.
Well, I thank you very much. I want to point something out to you. When I first started doing the show, Don would say, he would say my name in the opening credits, Gary Kroeger. And I'd have to go up to him, Don, it's Kroeger. That's what I said, Gary. No, you said Kroeger. Kroeger, long O, like the grocery store, Kroeger. All right, Kroeger. The next week, Gary Kroeger. Overtime. Don, a lovely man, by the way, got it right. But yes, that was a good Don Pardo, better than mine.
Well, I'm surprised because usually I'm the one getting people's names wrong.
you got me right.
Yeah, I did something better than Don Pardo. May he
You did.
rest his soul.
May rest his soul. Yes. Well, yeah, I had a front row seat, front and center to the explosion of Eddie Murphy in 1982.
Yeah, before we begin the show, well, first we should probably say what movie of his we're going to cover first, though if you clicked on the video, you already know. But we're going to begin with one of Eddie's 80s classics, Coming to America. Now, usually I cover movies from the mid 90s and beyond because most production companies just weren't really doing anything with the VHS. They might just have like one preview and then they show the movie. It wasn't really, for the most part, until the mid 90s that they started putting more and more previews and commercials onto the VHSs. But Coming to America is one of the exceptions, as they actually did have like one commercial and a couple trailers, and I feel like there's enough material to put on to this show to discuss, which is why we're going to be discussing it today. But before we do that, Gary, can you please tell us a bit about what it was like working with Eddie Murphy and what it was like, having, as you said, that front row seat to the explosion of him as this superstar that we know today?
Well, it's interesting because in 1982, that fall, the beginning of the season, I was hired with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Brad Hall, and a writer friend, Paul Barras, as well. And I didn't really watch the show then. I stopped watching when the original cast left. I was tangentially aware that the show was continuing, but it wasn't part of my Saturday ritual anymore. But I had vaguely heard of Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. I think Joe Piscopo because his name was Joe Piscopo. I mean, what a memorable name. So when we got there, Dick Ebersol put us in his office and he said, I want you to see what the show's been doing. And again, I didn't really know. I wasn't watching the show. And it was sketch after sketch with Joe and Eddie, but particularly Eddie stood out. Buckwheat and Mr. Robinson, Tyrone Green and all of these things. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this guy is sublime. He's off the charts. I'd never seen such instant magnetism with a camera, the audience, and personal self-confidence. Now, the guy was about 19 years old. I mean, I knew a kid, really. I was only 22, but he was 18, 19 years old. And I was just in awe, dumbstruck by how talented this young man was. What I noticed is Tim Kazurinsky took us around the office to show us around the offices and all this stuff. Everything had Eddie Murphy's signature on it. The lampshade said Eddie Murphy. A desk would say Eddie Murphy. The curtains would say Eddie Murphy. And I asked, "What's that about?" And Tim explained, Eddie's trying to get used to celebrity. So he's practicing signing his autograph. And about the time he said that, this young man comes around the corner with a smile that just lights up a room. And I just realized that I was in a unique presence. Now I don't, it sounds like I'm saying too much. Maybe I'm being too many superlatives and things, but I'm not really, because I was so struck. And then when we did the very first shows and things like Celebrity Hot Tub, I saw a guy take a very simple premise and turn it into magic in front of the audience. And I watched the audience feel like they were in the presence of a comedic genius. It was that kind of relationship. I'd often say it was like, to be in an Eddie Murphy sketch was like being on the Lucy show, where one of the guest stars, like John Wayne, would come on, the sketch would stop and everybody would clap. When Eddie came on to the camera, you would hear everybody go, it's an Eddie Murphy sketch. Oh, good. And so when his movies started coming out, and immediately they went right to the top, Trading Places, and then Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Cop 2, and they were monstrous hits because he was able to take that personality, the timing, the confidence, the uncanny ear from the TV camera to the movie camera. So I knew, it's a long answer to your question, but I knew that I was in the presence of a seminal figure in comedy, and really motion pictures as well.
Yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, like how many of his 80s classics did you end up seeing on the big screen?
What do you mean, his movies?
Yeah.
Well, I've seen them all. I mean, I think I missed a couple that were considered. I care about Eddie so much that when I would hear that, I can't even think of the names of the movies because I didn't see them. But he had a couple out there that I guess tanked, so I didn't bother to see them. I've seen all the Clumps movies, and the Nutty Professor, and every incarnation of Beverly Hills Cop, and of course, Coming to America 1 and 2. Um, I've never been. I've seen Dr. Dolittle. I've never been disappointed with an Eddie Murphy performance, but I haven't seen everything.
Well, of course, no one can. Not even a crazy super fan, but you know, focusing on Coming to America, did you get it on VHS and DVD, or did you just watch it in the movies?
Well, when it first came out, I watched it at the movie theater. And it really became somewhat of a phenomenon. I mean, it was really a well conceived, written by great friends of mine, Barry Blaustein and David Sheffield, who came from SNL. They wrote a lot of the classic Eddie Murphy sketches, and Eddie hired them to write Coming to America, and I believe Coming to America 2 as well. Um, and because they know how to capture Eddie's cadence, they know his characters, they know what he likes. And so I thought the chemistry with Arsenio Hall was really, really special. Um, and it was, it was formulaic in a way. You're like, okay, fish out of water. How does he navigate? But the performances were very charismatic. And so I loved it. So now I own it on DVD. So it's part of my regular collection of go-to movies is Coming to America when I sit down in my little den and I want to have a cigar and enjoy the evening. Coming to America is on my A rotation.
All right. Well, now you're about to watch the VHS opening for the very first classic Coming to America.
Шум, шум, шум. Ну почему столько шума? Эй, мужик, сегодня еще один классный день.
Not very long ago, America introduced Pepsi to the Soviet Union.
Господи, что же такое? Что он делает-то?
Посмотри на себя. Почему ты так одет?
And while it may be just a coincidence, a lot of refreshing changes have taken place ever since.
Эй, Миша! Неужели у тебя нет нормальных друзей? О, дети.
Pepsi, a generation ahead.
Эй, мужик, как дела?
Юрочка, не бери в голову.
So we begin with a Pepsi commercial about what was, the biggest issue in America at the time. Like, I wasn't even alive back in
You weren't.
1988. But yeah, even some people who weren't alive back then know that, that US and Russia were at each other's throats.
Well,
And
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it was the end of the Cold War. Glasnost was approaching, and but certainly through most of my life, the Cold War existed.
yeah, but it's like I'm watching that commercial, I'm saying, I see what you're doing, Pepsi. You're trying to portray yourself as the face of America. You're saying, hey, look at us. We're helping to end the Cold War. You should buy us, America. We're literally helping to resolve international conflicts. And I see what you're doing, Pepsi, putting it literally,
In front of
putting
coming to America.
a movie about foreigners coming to America. Like, I see what you're doing. I see kind of how you're trying to manipulate your audience into buying your product by both relating yourself to an actual international conflict and relating yourself to this beloved movie about foreigner and American relationships. Well, a lighthearted movie about that, but still, like,
Yes.
I see what you're doing.
Well, of course. I mean, and that's what marketing is. I mean, there was plenty of meetings going. All right, how do we position ourselves in front of this movie? This is the subject matter. I mean, Eddie's character wasn't from Russia, but at the time, again, this was the emergence of the new Soviet Union, and there were changes going on. So yes, I think Pepsi made a very calculated effort to marry the idea of foreign relations coming to America, but also the topic of the time. This was the era, correct me if I'm not, of Gorbachev. Um, and so, yes, I think it was a predictably uh, a predictable marketing decision.
Yeah. Now, does that make the commercial bad just because it's, yeah, kind of manipulative looking back? I mean, not necessarily.
I like it. I like
Yeah.
it. I was watching that thinking, I miss those days. I miss those days when, A, you took a few chances. There's something, it's a different style than what we do now. I can't really put my finger on what that style is, but it reminded me of how much I miss not being oversaturated with media. I miss when it was basically three television networks. I mean, cable was, of course, coming into its own, but it was still relatively young, and the formulas were all more or less TV style narratives. And I miss that. And so I felt that when I was watching that.
Yeah, you do see a lot of commercials now that are more like mini movies almost,
Yeah.
especially like during the Super Bowl. You'll see that like
Oh, yeah.
a lot of like commercials that are premiering before the Super Bowl that are basically like mini movies. Hey, look, we got
Well,
these big stars to promote this ad.
yes, and I think that period that you just showed was the beginning of that sort of Super Bowl explosion where the Super Bowl commercials became almost bigger than the game. But that was early in that because the first 20 years of the Super Bowl, commercials were commercials. And then that was the time when they became, like you say, these mini movies. And look at the stars we can get.
Yeah. Well, here, you just got a bunch of actors, nothing, no one that you would recognize, but
Right.
you know, hey, you were on an ad that appeared before coming to America and was positioned as this ad about how US Russia relations are improving.
Yeah.
Doesn't look bad on a resume.
Well, and it's also a very important part of the narrative is it's saying, look, they're not any different than we are. The relationships, the desires, the hopes, the dreams, it's very compelling, which is ultimately the story of coming to America, is you find ultimately out of the differences or perceived differences, all of these commonalities. And I think that was probably very deliberate with that
Yes.
commercial.
Here are some exciting coming attractions from Paramount.
Okay, so when I covered South Park Bigger, Longer, Uncut with Toddy and Zach, one thing that struck out was how like the interstitials or title sequences in between the trailers had like very minimal to little effort with
Mhm.
them, effort in them. It was just sort of like a black screen and a board announcer saying, here's what's coming up.
Coming to theaters.
Right.
Um, and this has a lot more effort. Like the title screen is actually animated. There's a
Uh-huh.
big sweeping orchestral behind it. The narrator actually sounds invested. It sounds like they did more than a take or two.
Right. Right. Right.
Kind of wondering like what exactly happened behind the scenes that in a decade they put less effort into the interstitials, because you'd think it would be the opposite, that they'd put more.
I don't know how to answer that because I really can't think of the reason why. I mean, here's how I look at it. When I see something like that, it's really trying to recreate what it was like when I was very young, right, and before, um, to go to the movies and to sit in the theater. And it was a very simple, projection. Paramount Pictures presents. It was all very, very simple like that. So if I'm to come up with something kind of on the spur of the moment, I would say they're trying to harken back to the majesty of the simplicity that preceded in films years ago, the classic films. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. And honestly, maybe by the late 90s, there wasn't that drive to harken back to that majesty anymore. I'm not sure why that would be.
No, except that, look at the late 90s, it's I mean, cable was exploding. It was, I look, I don't have my chronology in terms of dates, but satellite hadn't really taken over yet. It was pre-streaming, but we had suddenly 275 choices on cable to watch. I think the saturation of it all, or so many choices, might have dictated, hey, let's get away from all of that. Let's just cut to the chase. Let's get to the movie.
Yeah, that might be true. And that's probably true, even if, as I pointed out before, it seemed like as the 90s rolled on, they put more and more and more trailers instead of less and
Well,
less.
more and more because again, there were more and more choices. I mean, they probably had three other movies in the can that they want to get out, so each one cross promoted each other. They were filling so many platforms for content that maybe that's why.
Yeah, that's a good point. But let's see what it was coming to theaters in 1989.
A New York cop on the trail of a killer.
Well, our victims are certainly Yakuza.
From the back alleys of Manhattan
I got 2 clean homicides in there.
to the streets of Japan.
You have to leave your gun.
Hey, Superintendent, we are police officers.
You are civilians here.
You remember me, don't you?
You want to observe? Observe. This isn't New York.
Only want to talk to the man in 5 minutes.
Justice falls like black rain.
We don't want any more dead Americans.
I thought we were working together.
Michael Douglas. Black Rain.
So, of course, they put a trailer for a serious movie about an American going to a foreign country before a comedy about a foreigner going to an American country. And it's weird. I'm one of those people who's heard of like every movie or remembers every movie coming out. Here you got a movie starring Michael Douglas, directed by Ridley Scott. And I have to say, I have never heard of that movie. And, judging by that trailer, I'm not sure I'm missing that much. The action, even by 80s standards, seems kind of slow, which is kind of a problem for an action movie. And yeah.
Yeah, well, as I recall, I mean, I did see Black Rain. Not one of my favorite movies or anything, and certainly it's the dark side of the foreign relations equation, or spectrum. But correct me if I'm wrong, but that was Paramount, right? And Coming to America's, they would often package for the trailer of either. I'm sure you saw Coming to America before a Black Rain presentation, for example. So they would package their films to show the sort of cornucopia, if you will, of films that this particular studio had coming out. I'm sure, again, they make these assumptions. Well, people who are attracted to stories about foreigners out of place in another land, even though that's dramatic, still flock together. So to your previous point with the Pepsi commercial, I think that they do make those marketing decisions. That there's something similar in the premise, although much, much different in the narrative, that they thought was compatible.
Yeah. Yeah, I did notice that as well, that there was a similar theme going on. The Pepsi commercial is about bringing American culture to foreigners. This is about an American going to a foreign place, and it's premiering in front of the hottest movie at the moment about American foreign relations. And I will say that, not to sound like one of those people putting 2024 standards onto a 35-year-old movie.
Right.
But that movie looks like it might be kind of racist too.
I don't recall.
Okay.
Well, yes, and look, I'm sensitive to any time when the bad guys are of another nationality. I'm always sensitive to that. I'm sensitive to when the bad guys are Arabs. I'm sensitive to all of that. At the same time, it's sort of the genre of the time. Somebody's got to be the bad guy. They can't all be, white Americans like me. So I think they would find the thread of something in the news where maybe there was a cartel of some kind and then turn it into a movie. But you're right, it is exploitative.
Yeah. Again, I don't know. I haven't seen the movie. I haven't even heard of it until now. Maybe it's not as racist as the trailer is making it look. Uh, and you don't even seem like you remember if that was the case. But yeah, while I understand why it was put on the Coming to America VHS, can't say even with Sir Ridley directing and Michael Douglas starring, I'm going to be watching that anytime soon.
Again, I don't. I'm not a fan of the genre. I'm really not. I'm not a fan of exploitive, explosive rather, um, cop dramas and killing. No, it's not my thing. I don't really like any of those movies.
It's the best of Eddie Murphy, Saturday Night Live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jesse Jackson. Hi, I'm Buckwheat. Remember me?
Ronald Reagan's illegitimate son.
I'm the greatest fighter of all time.
Before Coming to America, the box office king of comedy reigned over Saturday night television.
Looking for love in all the wrong places. Looking for love.
Now, Eddie Murphy is coming to home video in the best of Eddie Murphy Saturday Night Live.
Sound too good to be true? Just in for my new book entitled, I Want to Be a Hoe.
You know what day it is? Girls, you know what day it is? What day is it?
Protein!
That's right, I've been getting my protein. Have you, girls?
I was the fifth Beatle. I have proof.
All right, what is that proof?
Well, here's a photograph of us back in 1962 before I didn't kick me out the group.
I am dark and you are light.
You are blind as a bat. I have sight.
Gonna get in the water. Gonna make me sweat that. Here I go, Hunter. I have to go now, boys and girls. So bye-bye.
The best of Eddie Murphy Saturday Night Live. Classic comedy for your home video collection. Only $24.95 from Paramount.
Come on and buy one. It'll make you smile.
So that was the last trailer on the Coming to America VHS. Again, very smart marketing decision on Paramount's behalf. Like,
easy to see the tie-in.
Yeah, like, oh, if you love these Eddie Murphy movies, then surely you'll want to revisit his tenure on SNL. We've got this video coming out of like the best skits he's been on. Trailer does a fairly decent job showing like his skits and the range of talent and he had and the diversity in his performances. I guess if I had any criticism, it could have been maybe a minute or two shorter. The trailer, I do think, dragged just a little bit, but it's a decent trailer for one of these compilation VHSs.
Absolutely. I think that they're all kind of timed to a certain amount. I mean, I think they have to fill up, what, 2.5 minutes or something like that. I mean, they're all basically the same length. To me, you can never have too much Eddie Murphy highlights. I never liked the little Richard Simmons character because I don't like gay exploitation either. In the context of the time, we weren't thinking that way. We weren't thinking as sensitively as we should have. So there was a lot of that kind of thing going on. But you saw the hot tub, James Brown's Celebrity Hot Tub, for example. And that was a sketch that Eddie said he didn't even understand on paper. And I didn't either. I thought, why is this a sketch? I can't get anything on the air, but this goes on the air. But then Eddie came out, made it his own, did his dance moves like James Brown and the too hot and hot. And it just became magic. So we saw that 2 or 3 times in that trailer, and they all remind you is spot on Bill Cosby impression, Stevie Wonder. I mean, he was really an amazing mimic.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
I think that is it for now, and now it is time to ask the age-old question. Skip to the feature or stay through the previews. And I will say that even though the Black Rain, God, I call it Black Train. Wow, it's that forgettable. I'm just forgetting the title.
I don't think you're going to be renting that anytime soon.
Yeah. Besides the Michael Douglas Goes to Asia movie trailer being mediocre, the Pepsi commercial was an interesting mirror into the late 80s. The Eddie Murphy Best of SNL trailer was fun. So I guess, yeah, and there's actually not much else on there. But, you know, the Paramount title cards were cool. So sure, for the first movie of Eddie Murphy month, stay through the previews.
Yeah. I actually, you know, I don't know. I'll never convince you that Black Rain was a great movie. And I don't even remember it well myself, except that I knew Michael Douglas back in the day because he did SNL, and I've always liked Michael Douglas a great deal. But again, it just wasn't my genre. But as far as previews go, I think that was a pretty good 1-2-3 punch.
Yeah.
You know, leading to a seminal comedy starring Eddie Murphy that's considered a classic. It's one of those films like Trains, Planes, and Automobiles that everybody has in their collection or has a fond memory of seeing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, Gary, before we leave, do you have anything to plug?
Do I have anything to plug? Well, you know, I'm an old retired guy now. I'm not in the business anymore. I write a blog, Gary Has Issues, which is political blog, GaryHasIssues.com. I have a podcast where director Ken Seisler and I get together and we talk about show business. We've got Paul Schaefer coming on. We've had Richard Kind. We've had all sorts, Brad Hall, interesting people in the business, and we talk about our lives and stuff. So it's an entertaining hour. That's the Gary and Kenny Show, and you can find that on YouTube. But other than that, you know, I do community theater and enjoy my life.
All right.
Well, I'm plugging my life.
Yep. We've discussed an adult movie starring Eddie Murphy. Not that kind of adult movie, but you know what I mean.
No.
But, you know, the man was a brand unto himself. And he wasn't just beloved by adults, but by kids as well. And we are going to be looking at 2 of his more family-friendly ventures, as next time we look at the VHSs for both Shrek and Shrek 2.
Oh, yes. Good one. Yeah, he created Donkey was something amazing, and that was his vocal performance alone.